and yell. I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. What a day of distraction it was attempted to be. The White House threw out everything they could to change the message. Started off with the tariffs, 10% tariff that we're imposing on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports. Smartwatches and the Fitbits, they got a reprieve, so you can get your little wrist. And I can't wear a watch, so it's kind of wasted. But they were, the lobbying must have worked. They were spared the 10% tariff. Also, we find out the Trump administration is going to cut the number of refugees allowed into the U.S. from 45,000 down to 30,000. So that was meant to go, but didn't happen. Also, Space Force. We finally got a price tag for Space Force, about $13 billion over 5 years. I think that's really lowballing the idea of having a Space Force, because I don't know that we have enough spaceships. Just kind of throwing that out there. Now, maybe it could be just kind of doing the practice stuff. I don't know. Also, today, Trump declassified all of James Comey's texts. A whole bunch of documents that they, I think, are going to selectively unredact. Because, look, you're going to throw out what you want people to hear and see. Evidently, they're trying to frame it as Obama was rigging the election. And they went after poor Carter Page. What we know about Carter Page, tons of ties with the Russians. And the reality is I want my FBI. As much as I'm distrustful of CIA, FBI, all of that, I do want them checking in, while we have someone working in a presidential campaign, working with a foreign adversary. Just kind of throwing that out there. And again, I can't imagine what would have happened had Obama done any of this stuff. I just can't imagine. Also, you had the president trying to distract. I had a big to-do on Hispanic Heritage Month. I had a big to-do. He tweeted out today, "We share our gratitude for all the ways Hispanic Americans make our country flourish and prosper. Today and every day we honor, cherish, and celebrate Hispanic American workers, family, students, businesses, and leaders." Is that before or after we target them to be thrown out of the country? Is that before or after we don't allow them to get a passport with a birth certificate? But if they had a Bible, hey, that's okay. Is that before or after all of that? Just kind of throwing that out there. That was today. Also, busy guy, got to give him credit. He said it was his great honor to host the inaugural meeting of the President's National Council for the American Worker. The inaugural meeting. Let's see, how long ago was January 20th of 2017 when he took office? Because remember, this was supposed to be right there near the top of, hey, we're going to take care of those American workers. Evidently had a little shindig in the Roosevelt Room. Also, on Thursday, they announced there's going to be a big rally in Las Vegas because they're going to make America great again at the rally. Interestingly enough, the 20th was supposed to be the day. It was supposed to be a big day. They were going to coronate a Supreme Court justice. They were going to celebrate the end of Roe versus Wade. They were going to celebrate the end of the 20th century. They were going to celebrate finally killing off Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal. And I'm assuming at some point there's going to be someone saying that Donald Trump should be on the dime. We want Donald Trump on the dime. Because obviously finish off the FDR legacy. Just like the idiots did during at the end of the Reagan era. Kick off FDR, put Reagan on the dime, which is interesting in itself. Now, the question is who's going to drop the dime on Trump? A lot of people. And look, all of this stuff that I've just laid out, one purpose. Massive distraction. A lot of, hey, over here, come on. Oh, way over here, come on. Hey, look at the shiny thing. Come on over here. Don't look at the Kavanaugh thing. No, that's bad. Over here with the shiny stuff. Here, stupid. Woo! Yeah, that's what that was meant to do. Now, the Kavanaugh thing, pretty impressive in my view now. They are actually moving the vote day. Not going to be Thursday, the 20th at 1:45 anymore. There will be a hearing on Monday, not just for the woman who is accusing him of some pretty vile stuff, but also he's going to testify. He is now on the record. This is the official word. There's no coming back to it. There's no, he says this is a completely false allegation. I have never done anything like what the accuser describes to her or anyone. Because this never happened, I had no idea who was making the accusation until she identified herself yesterday. He said, I am willing to talk to the Senate Judiciary Committee in any way the committee deems appropriate to refute this false allegation from 36 years ago and defend my integrity. Yeah, now on the record, there's no going back. There's no, oops, there's no, hey, I was drunk. There was no, hey, we were, that's her interpretation. There's none of that now. There is, didn't happen, wasn't there, don't know anything about it. The official line. It can only go south from here, and I'm hoping that Kavanaugh is the new Bork. This is what I'm hoping for right now. No more, and in fact, I'm sure the Bork family is hoping that as well. That we can make Kavanaugh a verb. I just got to throw that out there. And the thing is, it was interesting. I woke up this morning and I saw, a flurry of stories of, hey, should this happen? Should they delay the vote? This is, this earth-shattering news. And I'm going, well, one, this is the reason you don't rush a nominee through the process. This is why you do due diligence. This is why you actually do the legwork and the hard work of vetting these candidates, so that you don't put yourself and them in this kind of situation. And Trump has had this history already of throwing people into the lion's den who shouldn't be there because they've got some things that maybe were in the closet. I'm thinking Ronnie Jackson, who I'm sure was very happy in his cush job as the doctor for the president. Got, we travel all over the place and, was just hanging around in case. Was probably a cush job. Then he threw him into the lion's den to head up the VA, and he's out on his ear. No more cush job. And now everyone knows he's a drunken. He's a drunkard. This is the same thing with Kavanaugh. This is something that should have been fully vetted. Now you'll say, but he's gone through other confirmations, and that's true. And how could you possibly know? And maybe also true. But this rush job, you got to think. And this is the weird thing about, because I had talked about this last week with Bob Ney from Talk Medium News about how this was kind of just thrown out there. And, it's my thought that, she had to have this over the summer and say, hey, look, this is out there. You might not want to bring this guy through this because this is I want this to come out. And here at the last moment, did she Did she force this woman's hand? Because, even I was saying, look, I'm not putting any credence in an anonymous story. I'm not going to do that. But the second this woman came out and said, nope, this is what happened to me. She did the Washington Post interview. And when she read the letter, saying that, this is a very real allegation and something that has to be fully vetted. Now, interestingly enough, this morning, every Democrat on the committee called for the vote to be delayed. A handful of Republicans want more information. And the rest of them were crickets. Staying silent, couldn't make that choice. They didn't call for a delay expressly, but they were kind of trying to hedge their bets, all except Orrin Hatch. And Orrin Hatch caught me today because, and this is one of those things where, I remember as a kid playing football. The coaches always would put up something up on the board, a newspaper article that the other team had said something about us, or they got a hold of their scouting report, and they were targeting certain players, so they would pin those on our lockers, so we would get all fired up and all worked up. Orrin Hatch, I think, gave a lot of Democrats that kind of staple on the door kind of stuff. He was asked about, what if this woman's allegations are actually true? What if, they're corroborated? What if they're true? And he said, it's one of those moments where you just kind of, Hatch said, again, this is one of those things where, are you tone deaf, or did you not really hear what you said? He said that he had spoken with Kavanaugh and found him to be honest and straightforward and in denying these accusations. He said that the woman who brought the accusations, there might be, let me get the words perfectly clear. There's some question whether she's mixed up. There's some question whether she's mixed up. And then he went on to say, and this again is one of those things that just blows my mind, that I almost can't say it. If they are true, it would be hard, quote, it would be hard for senators not to consider who he is today. So, come on, that was a long time ago, didn't matter. Yeah, that. And you got to wonder, come election time, how many women are going to see that, and where will they vote? Could this be a year where you get 70% of women to vote for Democrats? I know that's really, really outrageously high. 75%. I mean, because at some point you've got to look at this administration. You've got to look at this president. You've got to look at who they surrounded themselves and put themselves in contact with and ask that question. So it is going to be quite interesting to see how this plays out. Now, interestingly enough, and not surprising, the right-wing media has gone and attacked this professor and this woman who's come forth, and doing it in just the way they always do. And we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Andrew Lawrence, a senior researcher at Media Matters, is going to come and share some of the attacks that we're now seeing. And look, only going to get worse from here. It can only get worse. Quick break. Right back with Andrew Lawrence. Stick around. Standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1947. That was the day workers at the International Harvester plant in Louisville, Kentucky had enough. they had just rejected a pay scale lower than that of harvester workers elsewhere. In her recent article for Leo Weekly, historian Tony Gilpin refers to the lower pay as the Southern differential. Harvester workers walked off the job in a 40-day strike. Black and white Louisville workers were united in a rare form of solidarity. International Harvester had had a long labor-hating history. Its forerunner had been the McCormick Reaper Works, the site that sparked the 1886 Haymarket incident in Chicago. Harvester had been able to keep the unions out until the farm equipment workers of the CIO finally organized there in 1941. And the FE followed Harvester as they attempted to escape to the union-free South. The FE successfully organized the new Louisville plant just 2 months before the strike. Workers learned quickly that they were paid much less making the same equipment as their brothers in Chicago, Indianapolis, and elsewhere. Gilpin adds that the FE literature forthrightly stated, quote, once the Negro and white workers were united, the low-wage system of the South would collapse. Workers pressed for their demands and appealed to area farmers for support. They stressed that farmers would not pay less for equipment, simply because local workers were paid less. Black and white workers picketed together, ate together, and planned their strike together at their new union hall. Harvester initially tried to red bait FE leaders. When that failed, the company was forced to grant steep wage increases. Gilpin cites FE News, which reported, quote, 2 smashing victories in hand. One over International Harvester, the other over the Mason-Dixon low wage line. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
So it's been exactly what you thought it was going to be today. Tons of right-wing attacks, accusations. Like I said, Orrin Hatcher and
proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
So it's been exactly what you thought it was going to be today. Tons of right-wing attacks, accusations. Like I said, Orrin Hatcher and well, we need to judge him who he is today kind of stuff. And you gotta throw that out there in all the different frames possible. The black kid who, when he was 15, stole a car. Do we now judge them on who he is today? Or no, is he still the black kid who stole the car when he was 15? This kind of stuff just enrages me. And the right wing very predictably attacked this woman incessantly. And, liar and you cheat and gold digger and all kinds of craziness that you expect from them. But it still doesn't change the reality. Still doesn't change that this is what she says happened, and I think Republicans are worried. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on what our right-wing blather fear has gone through. I've asked Andrew Lawrence to come talk with us. He's with Media Matters for America. Andrew, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, how you doing, man?
I'm good. Am I wrong here? You spend your day consuming the right-wing nut jobbery. The little glimpses that I've seen have just been attacking this woman and not even dealing with the potential that, she could be telling the truth.
No, I mean, it's 100% predictable. And as soon as she came forward last night and revealed her name, you knew that this was going to happen, and it did. And it's just the same pattern that we see over and over again. And they were making stuff up. They were going to ratemyprofessor.com and found the wrong Christine Ford there and attacking her. They were doxing her and making her address and phone number public on Twitter. It's just such a cesspool. And that's before, you get into what they're actually saying on Fox News or on the radio. It's just been a nonstop barrage of hate for this woman all day long. And it makes it pretty clear why these women don't want to come forward. And it's a real shame.
No, I mean, it absolutely is. I mean, you go back, and I remember living through the Anita Hill stuff and, all of the attacks that were, as the right wing was still in its infancy, as their media dominance still in its infancy. Talk radio was just crazy with, with Anita Hill and all of that. But it wasn't this bad in my view.
Right, and it's just an all-out assault on this woman, and all she did is come forward with a very credible accusation that should at least be fleshed out before this vote is taken. Are
you surprised that the Republicans pushed off the vote a couple of days to have a hearing and to bring Kavanaugh in and have him say it never happened?
I actually am. I think that you just take a look at the way that they handled Merrick Garland. It doesn't seem like sort of the norms, respecting these norms is something that usually Republicans care about. I think Flake coming out, and I forget who the other one was. I think it was Corker coming out. I think that kind of sent shockwaves through the Republican Party. So, they're going to push this back until Monday. I'm guessing that they're just going to try to poke holes in her story so that they can still vote to confirm this guy.
Sure.
And, until they show me otherwise, I'm going to assume that's what their motivation is here.
But I got to imagine, because the key to this entire vote has run through Maine and Alaska. And I got to imagine that Murkowski and Collins have got to have, situations in their past, who knows if maybe it didn't happen to them, but happened to friends that they identify with this woman. There's at least that's where my mindset is.
No, I think that's a good point. I also think it's unfair. We have to ask the same questions of all these senators, regardless of whether they're male or female. So I don't know if it's I don't personally think it's fair to put it all on Murkowski and Collins. But I think that, that it seems like Collins is sort of leaning towards no right now. It's really tough to get a gauge on this. But all it takes is two Republicans to vote no.
Right. And this is where, my mindset is where you go, I remember, Collins's, statement on Kavanaugh saying that he believed in decided law and given the John Roberts umpire speech and all of that. When it comes to Roe, when I think everybody knows he gets on the court, Roe's dead.
Right. And they're sort of coming out and saying that now as a reason to go ahead and confirm. And look, the interviews are going to take place a week from today. It is going to be an all-out assault on this woman from conservative media and from Fox News in particular. And Republicans are going to be hearing from that hardcore base that's where they get their news from, and that's where they get their talking points from. And they're going to be hearing from them a lot. So, we'll see. I'm kind of surprised that it's going the way that it is right now, though. It doesn't seem like the kind of thing that Republicans normally do.
Yeah, you got to give this woman just incredible courage, because last
Absolutely.
week I talked about, the anonymous letter. I'm going, if you're not going to come out and anonymous letters aren't going to help. You've got to come out and you've got to put a face to it. You got to put a story behind it. All that had to come out, and the fact that she has done that, because her life will never be the same from this point forward. And
Absolutely.
the next 6 months, if and I don't wish this on anyone, but if you had a nickel to pay for every death threat, I'm sure she's going to get, you could probably do a pretty serious dent in our national debt.
Absolutely. Her, like I said, her phone number and address are out there now. I can't imagine what she is going through right now. Probably somebody who wanted to, did not want her name out there, at least not in this respect, and over something like this. It's got to be hard for her and her family, and like you said, that's not getting into the harassment that is going to come from these awful people in the next few weeks and months.
Because, there's a large segment of the population, in my view, that regardless, if there wasn't video evidence, she's lying.
Right. Right, exactly. And that's not going to happen. And it does sort of concern me as far as what's going to happen in this interview. There's not going to be any physical evidence. There's not going to be any video evidence. And Kavanaugh's already come out to, deny this report, just a full-throated denial of this. So it's going to end up being he said versus she said. So we'll see.
But all you really need is one person to say, no, they were both there.
Right.
Because he said he has no idea what she's talking about, wasn't there.
Right. So, I don't know how much digging they're going to do in this. I know that, the FBI, I think, usually does the Supreme Court vetting on this type of stuff. So I don't know. I think they need Trump to ask them to look into something like this, which he hasn't done yet. So we'll see.
Yeah, would it have mattered? Do you think it would matter if he would have come out and say, no, hold on, I remember that incident. If that's how she remembers it, I'm sorry. That's not, hey, we were kids, we were drunk, it was the era, would that have mattered?
That is a really tough question to answer. I don't know. I don't know how Republicans would have reacted to that.
I think a slap on the back. I still think, regardless, I think he's, they're looking beyond his character flaws and what he's going to bring them judicially.
But the thing is, how many other conservative jurists are there out there that would vote the exact same way as him? And so with the midterms coming up, and with the issues that they already have, that Republicans already have with women, it's I can't imagine them wanting to go to the mats for Brett Kavanaugh. Especially, you look at the polling; he's one of the least popular nominees ever. I think his people, 38% want him confirmed. So it's not like he's a super popular choice. So we'll see. They've got a tough election coming up anyway right now. And I don't know if they want to be on the campaign trail bragging that they voted for this man.
Yeah, or defending what Orrin Hatch said. You look at Orrin Hatch, who was asked, what if it's true? And he said, well, we gotta look at who he is today.
Right. And we're talking about the Supreme Court here. Something like this in somebody's past. If that comes up in a job interview, it's going to be tough to get that job.
Yeah, but again, to me, as you watch this stuff unfolding, and look, I wasn't thrilled with how Feinstein brought this out. I think it should have been earlier in the process, and maybe playing the game. This is how it was supposed to be played out. But I'm going. This is what happens when you don't fully vet somebody. This is what happens when you try and usurp the system and ram somebody through. This is going to happen. And thank goodness it's happening now instead of, would have been Friday had the vote happened on Thursday.
Right. And, look, I'm with you. I would have liked to have seen this come out a little bit earlier, but you also have to, take into account that Professor Ford did not want her name out there at all. I can't imagine what she's going through right now. So, on the other hand, Feinstein was trying to respect her wishes for the most part.
Yeah, but you had to know the second you came out with the anonymous letter, somebody's digging that up because what was the number of I think 66 women were in that class. It would not have been hard for someone to narrow that down to who it was.
Right, absolutely. So like I said, I can't imagine what she's going through right now. I would have liked to have seen it come out a little bit earlier, but. We'll see. I guess they're both going to get a chance to talk here. But again, and I watch conservative media. It's what I do all day long, and it's just going to be an all-out assault on this woman until Kavanaugh is either confirmed or denied.
Yeah, and there's something seriously wrong with that. There's something seriously wrong with attacking this woman's character. And attack. I try never to do that kind of stuff. Because I always wonder, what happens if it's my family, if it's me, I get enough, hate mail, and I get enough, people, calling me everything under the sun. Right. I wouldn't want to do that to someone else.
Right. And, but it's not even attacking her character. You have Laura Ingraham today is saying that it's not even relevant to whether or not he should sit on the Supreme Court. And it is
How do you make that statement?
It's Laura Ingraham. That's the only explanation that I have. So and that was on her radio show today. She's on Fox News at 10:00. We'll see what she has to say on TV tonight. I can't imagine that it's going to be much different though.
And it's one of those things where you go, as a woman, maybe I just put too much into that. Maybe breaking down the gender barriers is probably a good thing.
Right.
Because maybe part of what. Because look, I'm a little bit older than Kavanaugh, so I lived through that era as well, where the idea was girls want to, but they need a little convincing, not holding them down, putting your hand over their mouth and all of that, but you need a little no means no ish. But that was the era. And I got to wonder if that's going to eventually be the argument that they make.
And you can sort of see people already making that argument too. It's really frustrating, and it's just so gross. It's tough to watch these arguments being made when, if you read that letter, and for your listeners, I mean, I urge everybody to go read it, as tough as it is. It's vile. What she's accusing him of it's tough to read. And somebody like that, if he did that, if these accusations are true, they should not be sitting on the Supreme Court for the rest of their life.
No, I'm with you. Do you think this the conservative pundit Mike Judge is do you put any validity in anything that he says, given the fact that he's so decidedly to the extreme right and has written on this in multiple places that
you can't. I mean, you can't. This man is not a character witness. Some of the stuff that he's written, some of the stuff that he said, he talked about going through high school blackout drunk the entire time. So no, you can't put any stock into what this man says. And Kavanaugh should be embarrassed that they're using him as a character witness for him.
Yeah, well, look, I barely remember the 80s as well, and some of the extreme drinking happened a lot when I was in school. So, who knows? I mean, see, if I were Kavanaugh, maybe that would have been the defense. I truly don't remember. We drank a lot.
Right.
We did a lot of things. Who knows?
Right. But it's just, no excuse for something like that, especially, she says that he cornered her. He forced her into the room. He turned up the music so people couldn't hear her protesting. That's not normal.
Yeah, that's also not the sign of someone who's blackout drunk.
Right.
There's not a lot of forethought in blackout drunk.
Right.
There's more like falling over and slobbering and that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, this was, if what she says is true, she's just, describing a premeditated act to corner her in that room.
Wow. Well, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out over the next couple of days, and I don't envy you having to watch all the right-wing blather that goes on, but thank goodness you do. So let me last question. What's the most vile thing so far? Would it be the Laura Ingraham thing? What's the most outrageous claim you've seen so far?
I think it's tough to beat Laura Ingraham's litany of statements that she made today. Saying this could happen to anybody. Let's focus on the men for a minute. That type of stuff. That's pretty hard to beat. But I think the actual harassment, the doxing of this woman, the publishing of her address and phone numbers for the sole reason to harass her. It's evil. It's just so gross, and I don't know. I can't imagine being somebody that does that.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff to me. But Andrew, I appreciate the time. Keep up the great work there at Media Matters, and I look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate it, and I always look forward to talking to you, man. I'm looking forward to the next time.
Good stuff. Thanks so much, Andrew Lawrence. And look, at the end of this, he's right. I mean, these people are, in my view, just vile. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. Southern textile employers met together in Greenville, North Carolina. They met to plan a coordinated response to the national textile strike. The Great Depression had ravaged the textile industry. Workers were subject to the, quote, stretch out. Fewer workers were expected to work at a faster pace to produce the same amount of products. Work in textile mills was already grueling. The stretch out made conditions even more unbearable. Fed up, 20,000 Southern workers walked off the job in July. From there, the numbers grew. On Labor Day, 65,000 workers in North Carolina joined the strike. Strikers confronted scabs and moved to close down mills not participating in the strike. They also disrupted railroad traffic. In response, the National Guard was called out against the strikers. Violence erupted between the strikers and armed police and strikebreakers throughout the South and New England. the Southern owners decided it was time to marshal their own response to the strike. According to historian Jeremy Brecker, an army of 10,000 National Guardsmen was mobilized in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi, supplemented by 15,000 armed deputies. But despite this show of force, the strike grew. More than 400,000 textile workers had walked off the job. In response, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration declared that the working conditions and wages in the industry should be studied. Although there were no guarantees for improvement, union leaders called off the strike. Much to the anger of many rank-and-file union members, one of the largest worker actions in U.S. history and one of the most important uprising of Southern labor was ended.
No matter how hard you try, you can't stop us now.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Since the prehistoric ages and the days of ancient Greece, on down to the Middle Ages, planet Earth kept going through changes. And then the Renaissance came, and times continue to change. Nothing stayed the same, but there were always renegades. Like you said, Tom Paine, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So all of it just seems like every day some new bit of information, another shoe falls off the centipede, more and more. Well, the more we learn about the administration, the more we were right about them all along. Corrupt. And the story over the weekend, this is one of those bizarre moments. For those who follow Tom Arnold on Twitter, evidently Tom Arnold was attacked by MGM television chairman Mark Burnett. Evidently Burnett has the tapes of Trump from The Apprentice. Arnold has been saying, hey, release the tapes. We want to see all of Trump unvarnished, which we should have been asking for in 2015 and 2016, by the way. But evidently there's potential that someone already has them. But evidently over the weekend, Burnett, who I guess while living in the UK was part of the UK's special forces, attacked Arnold, choking him. There was a big dust-up, and I guess Arnold has filed charges in West LA. The plot just thickens. But at the end of it, could it be that, well, the tapes, could we find out more? And the reality is will the Republican Party, as corrupt as they've become, will they do anything about it? And again, I don't have any faith in them, which is why I say we need to be electing Democrats right now in every office across this country to hold Republicans accountable and to, well, clean up the mess and the stink that they've created. And here to share some thoughts, I've asked Brett Pransky to come talk with us. He's a Democratic candidate for state representative in Ohio's 77th House District. Brett, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, am I getting this right, that these tapes could be out there?
Well, from what I understand, I've been speaking to a few different people about it, and I don't want to, pretend to have sources above my pay grade or anything. But the story seems to be that during that scuffle that you mentioned, in your intro a minute ago, the language being used was very specific, and it was about a certain person who had these tapes, who supposedly had these tapes. And that person is Ronan Farrow from the New Yorker. Now, if that is true, and again, we're still in the land of speculation here, but if that is true, that's probably about the worst possible circumstance the administration could be in. Because if you're not familiar with Ronan Farrow's work, you go back to the Harvey Weinstein case. Most recently, Les Moonves at CBS was a target of one of his stories and so on. Basically, if you know that Ronan Farrow is writing about you, you're going to have a bad day,
right?
So
unless you're Donald Trump, unless you're Donald Trump. Because look, I don't know that there's anything on those tapes that would actually get his supporters to turn against him.
Well, that's true, and again, we are still in the land of speculation. These things have a tendency to move from speculation to at least some form of confirmation. Now, I will reference a tweet that Ronan Farrow put up today. He actually retweeted something from July, basically about speculation. in which he said that he does not comment about stories he has not yet published.
Right.
Which was the basic message, which again is not a denial either. And given the amount of attention these tapes would get, if you don't have them and you issue a kind of half-hearted or non-denial as he did, you know you're going to get a lot of attention.
A lot of blowback.
Yeah, it seems to be that there must be some. Now we don't know what, we don't know how much, we don't know how many, and we have no idea what would be on these things if he does have them. So there's still so much out there that is just pure speculation that we can't really say, oh, this is it, or this is what we've been waiting for. And I know a lot of people, kind of want to go there, especially people who've been really, fighting the good fight for some time now. And we got to be careful not to, not to treat it as fact when it is not, at least.
And you don't want to overhype it. I mean, to me, the interesting part of it would be if it is truly Trump unvarnished. If it's truly him, we should put these on pay-per-view. I mean, I know I'm a big pay-per-view fan, but this is maybe how we solve the national debt. Because look, I would pay to see it.
Yeah, I mean, our evidence of Trump unvarnished, it pretty much tells us that, whatever is on these tapes is going to be awful, and chances are it's going to be one of a few different brands of awful, but it's going to be the kind of thing that is going to make us, kind of back up in shock, and so.
Really, do you think we're capable of now at this juncture, almost a year and a half, almost 2 years of this? Do you think we're capable of shock and capable of backing up anymore?
Yeah, we're going to need some kind of new medical terminology for shock fatigue or something like that, because we have seen so much. Every day is a new story that would have ended pretty much any administration before this one, and yet it just keeps happening and happening and happening. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You just can't turn your eyes away from it, but yet you're horrified at the same time. So it's really a difficult thing to manage every day. And I know there's a lot of people out there who are feeling real anxiety about it.
Yeah, no, and look, it can consume you if you let it. And that's one of those things that I say, you need to take a break every once in a while and then come back to it. Because here's the thing. I can't imagine there being anything worse on these tapes than grabbing her by the you-know-what in the Access Hollywood tapes. I can't imagine it gets any worse than that, other than, he said the N-word. That's got to be part of it. And probably other things as well. And the hope is that, people go, well, okay, now we see him for who he is. But, there are those of us who, we see him that way already.
Right. Well, I think that's kind of where we're at now. I mean, there is a percentage of the population now that we call Trump's base, and we've labeled them in all kinds of different ways. And but then what happens is there has to be a thing, there has to be something that finally cracks that final kind of level of support that he's got out there. Because I'm telling you, I'm running a campaign now. I'm out knocking doors every day. There's not a whole lot of people out there, who are that, if that 30% exists, I'm not seeing them, and I live in a pretty deep red district. So, I think folks are really beginning to kind of turn away from this, and starting to be ashamed of the administration, their policies, and what they're doing, and just how they're behaving on a daily basis.
So while you're out there knocking on doors, because I've had recently a number of conversations with conservatives, with people who voted for Trump and are going, well, the discourse is a little too extreme. We're destroying all of the norms, and there are a lot of folks on both sides of the aisle who don't know if we can go back to an era of good governance, an era of bipartisan government.
Right. I mean, one thing that I found out, one from being out on doors talking to voters, and again, I knock on all kinds of doors. When you're running in my area, you can't just talk to your base. You can't just talk to Democrats. You got to get out and talk to everybody. So what I'm seeing an environment in which everyone, regardless of party, regardless of affiliation, they're listening and they're open to the conversation. So the idea that we are this divided, I think, is more a media thing than it is a reality. There's a lot of people out there who are tired. There's a lot of people out there who do still vote in kind of a tribal way, where they're just going to back their team no matter what. But it's not nearly as much as I thought it would be, And on the other hand, you know, there have been times when I've been in the room with legislators on both sides of the aisle too. And I find that even in those circles, people are more open to real conversation. They're just not allowed to talk about it in public.
No, and
so
that's
in front of the camera and they play their role.
Yep.
And then they turn into adults when it's just, you know, when it's just them in the room. I think if we, you know, if we can kind of stamp down the appetite we have for the bitterness, then I think we can go back to a point where the two sides can work together and make things happen.
You know, I've made the argument that I think CNN was, not C-SPAN was probably the worst thing that ever came up, to where you get into watching the sausage being made, so to speak. That you see the speeches on the floor, and those become those are little little mini commercials instead of true legislative arguments. And I don't know if you'll agree, but it's one of those moments where you go, when everything is on camera and you can do none of the backroom wheeling and dealing that has given people the cover to be able to work across the aisle and get things actually done, like pave roads and build bridges and fund education and healthcare. And you can go down the list of all the things that have become political issues that you're right. The average person doesn't care which side of the aisle it's on.
Yeah, the average person cares about their wallet, and cares about how their wallet is doing week to week and day to day. And, and we do have this kind of, 24-hour news cycle. Everything's on camera. Everybody is always on stage at one point or another. I mean, we saw it even during the Kavanaugh hearings. And I thought, the Democrats in those hearings asked the right questions and did the right things. But you knew who was running for president. I mean, you knew it, by listening to them. There were some people who were not only asking questions, but were also performing at the same time. And not that I would fault them for that necessarily, especially the folks who are going to run, but we are constantly aware of being on camera, of being on stage, that, that our next job or our next goal or whatever might hinge on what we're doing right now. So we have to get it right and so on. So, and I think that takes some options away from us in terms of working together.
Yeah, I mean, you're right in that. And look, I look at Cory Booker and I'm a little uncomfortable with the breaking of the rules, just because when we start down that path, it only gets worse. Right.
And then, for example, these hearings that we're having now about Judge Kavanaugh, you used to need 60 votes.
Right.
You had to work together in order to put a judge on the bench, and you had to concede something to the other side. But now we've changed those rules. So now what's happening next is some other people are breaking some other rules, because some of the things that used to, govern this system and force a little more bipartisan approach are now no longer exist. So now we have to look at other norms. Okay, do these have to be the next ones to go? And, I think that's a bad thing, but I think we need to trace it all the way back to the source.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's when all of these walls start breaking down, you have rules for a reason. There things get done in a certain way for a reason. And, it's like the whole deregulation argument. Let's just tear it apart and let the free market decide. Let it be the wild, wild west. Well, the wild, wild west wasn't that great.
Right. Yeah, and total deregulation will get you some pretty cloudy air, some bad water, and a whole lot of dead people. I mean, at some point we have to find a balance. We can't just stay in our partisan corners. Everything can't be a binary argument. You know what I mean? It can't be all of one or all of the other. If you can't find some way to knock down barriers and meet in the middle, and this is probably where our government is breaking down more than anywhere else. If you can't find an accommodation between two sides who disagree, well, then you need to find another job.
Yeah.
Because we have to find a way to do this. And I think that's a good reason to vote folks out, just for that reason. Just the inability to work with each other, the inability to find compromise and reasonable compromise.
Now, we've talked a number of times, and I like you. I think you'll be a great state representative, because you have this kind of thoughtfulness and this drive to want to actually get things done and make people's lives better, which again is where I think Democrats generally find themselves. They're willing to compromise a lot more than Republicans are, because Republicans have homogenized themselves. They've pushed out any moderating forces within their party, and they've now become the party of extreme, and well, not just extreme, but of corruption. I mean, every day there seems to be like a new scandal coming out of this administration that the Republican Party and the Congress will not do anything about.
Right, and you'll find that tends to trail all the way down into the states too. We get the same number of corruption stories here in our state and local politics that we get in you know, in our national politics. They just don't get as much attention because, you know, they're just at the state level. But I mean, we had a Speaker of the House resign in a corruption scandal. He's being investigated by the FBI. He most likely in the fall going to be replaced by a guy who lost the same job 15 years ago, also chased out on corruption charges. It's getting ridiculous, and we have to do something about it. So it's a matter of, and even those who aren't necessarily wholly corrupt are still profiting from the system. You know, the big money systems and things like that, especially down here at the state level. I mean, you know, my opposition will outspend me 10 to 1, and it'll all be outside special interest money, and there's nothing we can do about that. You know, and it's getting pretty ridiculous, to be honest with you.
And this is why I think a lot of people turn away from the whole system. They're all corrupt, they're all crooks, they're all no good. And even you, Brett, and I love you. I think you'd be a great representative. Even you, you're corrupt. Why would you want to be involved in this cesspool? And it's just that broad brush blanket kind of assumption that everyone's corrupt and there's no hope for the system. Which I'll tell you, you know, as you know, especially on Constitution Day, is scary to me because. You know, you look at, I read something the other day, the average constitution around the world lasts about 12 years. Somehow ours has lasted more than 200. And I fear, you know, we continue down this path, not many more.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea that, and sometimes I think it's just the easy way out. So we see corruption and we just decide to broad brush the entire system. And I've had this happen to me a number of times. I'm a first-time candidate. You know, I'm a first-time candidate juggling a campaign plus a day job plus 2 kids at home and the whole 9 yards. And my award, if I win, is to take a pay cut. You know what I mean? So it's not the type of situation where this is going to be a stepping stone and something like that, where you could potentially accuse me of doing anything other than just simply wanting to serve. But people are so tired of the entire system. It doesn't matter what role you play in it, even if you are a first-time candidate who spends most of his time in the classroom. You know, you're still painted with the same broad brush. I'm not even technically a politician yet. I haven't been elected to anything. I'm still just a candidate, you know. Now, after November 6th, I plan on being a politician for at least a couple of years and hopefully doing a good job for the voters. But as of now, I'm just some guy from the neighborhood who's got a bit of an education and is willing to go out there and help people. And it's really hard to convince my friends and neighbors that that is exactly what I'm there to do. There's a inherent suspicion of everyone, regardless of party, regardless of affiliation, that you must be corrupt, because you want to be a part of the system. No, I want to change this system, you know, because I'm just tired of it. I've seen it, I've seen it operate, and I'm just tired of it. You know, some people in 2016, they ran away. They said, that's it, I'm never going to vote again. I'm tired of it. I can't handle this anymore. Everyone is too corrupt. And some people, and you're seeing it all over the country, they ran towards it. You know, they ran towards the trouble. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be a first-time candidate. I'm going to run in a race where someone like me has never won before. You know, and all over the country, we're seeing these stories. First-time candidates, more women than we've ever had, you know, running in these races. There are wonderfully, you know, historic things going on right now from people who just want to serve. And I just hope that the voters out there give them a chance to do it.
And I hope they show up. I mean, and, you know, I look at, you know, everything this administration has done. And look, you know, I've had people who say, well, you know, he's done a couple of things that you agree with. And that's true. There are a couple of things that Trump has done that I actually agree with, but very few. And, you know, I give credit where credit is due. You know, I attacked Obama when he deserved it. And I've given credit to Trump where he deserves it. And again, like I said, not a lot of times. But I think the scandal, I think the attack on our democracy, I think these Supreme Court justices that he's nominated, I think this is all destructive for us.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, when you think about it, especially, and, you know, not to just go full partisan and attack my opposition, but so much of this is happening on the GOP side of things. I mean, when you look at the changes that have happened in the Republican Party, I heard someone tell me the other day, it was actually in reference to John McCain. They said we just buried the last Republican. You know, and it was kind of stunning, but I had a really hard time arguing with that. You know, here's someone who reached across the aisle, who I didn't always agree with, but who always, you know, did his best to serve. We all, you know, we had different ideas but the same goal. I can't find that in too many places in the current system. People, you know, people on the other side of the aisle who I really truly believe want the best for people, you know. It's all about money, and it's all about advancing, and it's all about seizing power and so on. these are horrible, horrible things that we have to fight against. I don't necessarily want to fight against these things. I want to ask the people for a job and then reach across the aisle and do as much good work as I can. But
yeah, but don't you have to fight against those things? I mean, at the end of the day, don't you have to fight against the idea that we need to give more tax cuts to the very wealthy and literally take food out of the mouths of children to do it?
Yeah, and not only that, but the influences get a lot worse than that. I mean, when you look at the folks on the right, kind of what the GOP platform has been whittled down to in the last 20, 30 years, they basically just have three things that you have to be able to say out loud to be a Republican. You have to say the right thing about guns, you have to say the right thing, you have to be pro-life, and you have to say the right thing about religion. And if you say those three things, you're allowed to be a member of the party, and you can be absolutely vile in between. That's why, for example, in the Illinois 6 right now, the Republicans are running a full-on Nazi.
Yeah.
A swastika-wearing Nazi. You know, Tim Kaine's opponent in Virginia, again, some serious Nazi troubles. There are some vile, vile people running under the GOP side of things. And when you look at their platform and what they stand for, there's nothing in there that forbids it. So it's just of course these people are showing up, you know, as Republicans. There's nothing in the platform that forbids them. But you come over to the Democratic side of things, and it's one of the first things we want. We want equality. We're for equality for everyone. So I'm sorry, if you're a vile racist, you're not allowed. The other side should have that same provision, but apparently they don't, because these guys keep popping up, and there's several of them in the administration.
Well, I mean, come on. Have you followed Steve King? I mean, have you followed a lot of the Lou Barlotta? Have you followed a lot of these congressmen and these Republicans over the years who have just said, along the lines of a lot of the vile stuff that you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, Steve King in particular is just a horrible human being, and I had the pleasure of meeting his opponent, J.D. Scholten, who's going to win that race, by the way. J.D. is an interesting, engaging candidate, high-energy guy. I mean, he's going to win that race. It's going to be improbable, and the people are going to be shocked about it on Election Day, but I'm telling you right now, J.D. Scholten's going to win that race.
As he should. I mean, come on. I mean, King he's an abomination.
Right. I mean, it's stunning that people who hold these views and openly hold these views. I mean, it's not that I'm stunned that we vote them into office. I'm stunned that we don't run them out on a rail. I mean, it really does shock me when I see, and go down the list. Look at the Roy Moores, the Joe Arpaio's, the Jim Jordans, Stephen Miller, as a mouthpiece in the White House. Right? These are vile people. You know what I mean? With some really openly racist views that they don't mind, sharing with anyone who will listen. And they get enough support to win. I mean, it's just stunning. I don't know how it keeps happening, because I know, even if, let's just say Trump's base is 30%. Let's say it's a solid 30%. That's not enough to win. Where are these people in the middle? All right, who, when a Nazi runs in the Illinois 6, say, you know what? I know he's a Nazi, but I just can't vote Democrat. Who are these people?
But see, I've met them. I mean, well, look at you see the picture of the two guys who would vote for a Russian before voting for a Democrat.
That happened in my backyard. That happened when Trump was in Ohio. Yeah, I think it was better Russian than Democrat.
Yeah.
I mean, this is kind of what we have. When we get that kind of tribal, then we have seriously lost our way. All right, because my granddad fought the Nazis. I grew up, pretending like I was fighting the Russians. Like the Russians were going to parachute in every second, things like that. This isn't who we are, and now we're acting like they're our friends when they don't have any special affinity for us. They'd take us out tomorrow if they could. So why all of a sudden is a hostile foreign power better than my patriotic opposition? I mean, imagine that. That's how far we've gone, and we got to bring it back.
No, I ask that question all the time, and again, it's being saturated morning to night with Fox News and all of the right wing blather and all of that. In fact, last week we talked to a guy, David Weisman, who was saying, look, I was on that Trump train. I was one of the leaders of the Trump train, and he had this moment where he's arguing with Sarah Silverman, and they're going back and forth, and he started to actually do some research, and found out she wasn't crazy.
Right. Right, and there's been, I mean, it just the idea of, and that's why one thing I love about being out knocking on doors, which, is about 90% of running a campaign like mine, is when you knock on someone's door, you can have this conversation, and you can have it civilly. And I was speaking to a gentleman just the other day who opposed me on most of my views, But I was able to talk to that person and say, you know what, if you and I were in office with our opposing views, you know, my favorite person in the world is a really smart person who disagrees with me. So when we have a situation where we disagree, but we can come to an accommodation, that's probably the best of all possible worlds.
Absolutely. I'm right there. Absolutely. And this is where we're going to have to leave it. Brett, I appreciate the time. I wish you the best. I hope people will check out your website, brettpransky.com. Good stuff, man. Thanks so much, Brett. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show.
There's a brand new chef today.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
Donald Trump bragged in 2016 that, quote, I know words. I have the best words. Well, occasionally he does use some very fine words that convey great promise, as in this sentence. I'm going to fight for every person in this country who believes government should serve the people, not the donors and special interests. Trump also declared he would, quote, drain the swamp to rid Washington of those creepy, crawly special interest lobbyists. Excellent words, but they only matter if the speaker actually means them, backing their rhetorical promise with action. As we've seen, though, far from draining the swamp, Trump converted the White House itself into a fetid cesspool of lobbyists, corporate executives, and banksters. His transition team was almost exclusively made up of those swamp critters. His glitzy inaugural celebration was bankrolled by big oil, big coal, big pharma, and other bigs that attached their legislative and regulatory demands to the checks they donated. Most of his top officials come straight out of Wall Street and corporate suites, turning Trump's government into a sump pump that is routinely funneling billions of dollars in special regulatory favors to the moneyed elite. When asked why he put Wall Street hucksters in charge of economic policy, he offered this scramble of words that inadvertently revealed his true plutocratic soul. I love all people, rich or poor, but in these positions, I just don't want a poor person. This is Jim Hightower saying, really? Not even one official who understands poverty from first-hand experience and could not only give you advice, but also some understanding? And what about those hard-hit middle-class workers Trump always talks about? Nope. He hasn't appointed a single one to a top policy position. So forget Trump's words. If the poor and middle class aren't in his government, they're not in his heart either, nor in his policies.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Sanity for a change. The Rick Smith Show.
Yeah, a few good people on both sides. I'm still going with the good people. Kavanaugh's a good guy. Orrin Hatch saying, well, we still, even if it were true, even if he did rape her, well, we'd still have to find out who he's become. The person that he's become all these years later. And like I said at the beginning, do we say that, about the black teenager who maybe heisted a car or, did something stupid as a teenager? Do we say that down the road about them? No. Or any poor kid across this country. What we're witnessing from the right wing really is wealthy white privilege. And not even just wealthy. This is what the wealthy get away with. Or just my thought. And here to share some thoughts on the Kavanaugh ordeal, I've asked our good friend Propane Jane to come share some thoughts as well. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So am I on the wrong train here? Because, I'm looking at Kavanaugh and I'm going, what do you expect? What do you expect from this guy?
No, I'm with you. I'm with you 100%. I think this is just indicative of the attitude that we've seen and the position that the Republican Party takes, which is very anti-woman in general. And it's not even just anti-woman, it's actually abusive. And this is why just the days, within days after Trump's inauguration, you had the Million Woman March. And I think that was a very strong admission at that moment that women were really turned off by this man. And this is somebody who, you know, is grab them by the you-know-what, and is a self-proclaimed sexual predator himself. And so it's no coincidence that the people that he chooses to elevate to positions like a Supreme Court justice have that same element in their background, and that lack of character, and I think lack of judgment in particular as it relates to women's issues and human rights issues.
Do you think it's a lack of character and a lack of judgment, or do you think it's a sense of entitlement that everything is mine for the taking? Like I know I grew up with some rich kids, and I know some people who, you know, grew up with significant money, not middle class, upper middle class, I'm talking significant money, and they have a much different world view than I had. And in fact, you know, I've wondered, you know, for a while, you know, do we raise our kids the right way? I mean, with solid working class values and ethics and that, as opposed to the world is their oyster for the taking kind of thinking.
Yeah, I think it's both. And I think that the lack of insight and judgment comes from a very narcissistic root where that person comes first and nobody else matters. And they're just out to get what they want in a situation, and they have no empathy or sympathy for whoever's in their path. And so I do think that you see this arrogance, this sense of entitlement, you know, for lack of a better word, narcissism. I mean, that's what it is. And I think that it is particularly just running rampant right now, because you have Trump at the helm, who's getting away with everything, right? I mean, he's arrogant. He's all of these same character traits that we're describing, and there are no consequences. And so he continues to just get away with what he gets away with, and therefore that builds that sense of entitlement. Well, of course I can do this. Who's going to stop me? And this is the attitude that you see being espoused by not only Trump, but also the entire Republican Party. They genuinely don't care. They want this man on the Supreme Court, and it doesn't matter what happened 30 years ago. It doesn't matter what happened yesterday. All of his policy stances are anti-woman, and so I think this is just something that goes along with the overall sentiment that is coming from that wing of the political spectrum right now. It's just a lot of misogyny.
So, what do you say to Orrin Hatch, who says, "Well, you know, if it were true, you still have to look at who he's become. You know, that was a long time ago. He's better now." What do you do with that argument?
Well, but he's not demonstrating that. Somebody who has, you know, maybe had a situation like this happen in their youth, and that's actually gone forward and learned from it and changed, would theoretically be able to acknowledge it on its face and say, hey, yeah, that is something that I did that was totally inappropriate, and I'm very sorry for that person. He doesn't know what has transpired in this woman's life all of those years since that happened to her. He may think of it as, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. It didn't become this, you know, whatever the nightmare, you know, that people have in their minds conjured up. But they don't know what that was like for her individually and what it continues to be like, especially in the midst of, you know, her identity being revealed and all of that. And so the fact that he's not showing really any empathy for any of that, and just has this attitude of, I never did anything wrong, this woman doesn't know what she's talking about. I mean, you know, he's just very dismissive of the whole situation. And so I don't think that actually demonstrates any type of growth or evolution on his part.
Yeah, I love the Orrin Hatch statement that, you know, he found Kavanaugh to be honest and straightforward, and said that there was some question on whether this woman was, quote unquote, mixed up.
I mean, Kavanaugh has already perjured himself. I mean, can we not?
Well, of course, but I'm looking at this going, you know, I look at this because I'm focused on Hatch here, because, you know, how do you justify this? I mean, she's mixed? Is this the next Anita Hill moment? You know, I mean, you know, Arlen Specter's long gone, but his statement's going to live on forever. The same thing here with Hatch, in my view.
Well, and Hatch speaks for all of them. Hatch speaks for all of them because none of them are saying anything better than that.
Yeah.
And so this mentality, I think, again, is just, that is who they are. And they really honestly don't see anything wrong with this. They don't think that the process has been sullied in any way. They don't think that he's been a poor representation, excuse me, of what should be on the Supreme Court, even thus far. And he hasn't performed well in these hearings. He's come across as somebody that you can't trust. He's come across as somebody who has ulterior motives and is holding things back on purpose.
Yep.
And I think the behavior of the Republican Party in terms of like Chuck Grassley, I mean, he's the one that I'm really, shaking my head at, because this situation with the letter and, all of a sudden he has, 65 women that are willing to state that he was such a great guy back in high school.
Yeah, but they weren't in that room.
They weren't in that room, number one. And how did you produce this letter within 12 hours of this being a breaking news story?
Well, you got to understand that. I'm sure Dianne Feinstein went to them over the summer and said, hey, pull this guy. Look, this is what we've got. And I'm sure they've had this for a while. The reports are they had it over the summer. I'm sure that they talked. I'm sure this was all prepared. And I'm wondering why it didn't come out in the initial initial hearings, other than, this is how they wanted the game to be played.
But that's even worse, in my opinion. I mean, and I totally agree with you that this is something that has been in the works. They've known this about him for months now. And they've learned absolutely no lessons from Roy Moore.
Yeah. Well, no, yeah, you're right. But, look, because I had said last week, when the anonymous letter came out, I said, I don't know about this. I don't know if I wanted, I don't like things in anonymity. I guess it's just, being a white guy, privileged, I guess, is part of that. But I want to know who it is. I want to be able to understand the story and hear the story and all of that.
Yeah.
And then as I was thinking about it, you're talking about a very small class, 66 people, 65 of which came out and said, no, he's a great guy. So it wouldn't have been very hard to figure out who this woman was after it came out anyway. So she didn't have really a choice but to come out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I think, even over the weekend, they've gone into the letter and who actually signed it and caught up with these women. And, now they're sort of like, oh, well, I don't really want to say anything. Who knows if they even knew that they were actually giving an endorsement of somebody who was due to have sexual misconduct allegations raised against him.
And it could have been some of them as well. I mean, because, hey, look, we were drunk. It was what it was. That's always the excuse. And look, I grew up during that same era, and there was a lot of drinking going on, and there was a lot of stuff that, I'm sure most people weren't proud of, which is why when this came up, my thought was if Kavanaugh did it, do what Al Franken did, step in front of it, be honest about it.
Yeah.
But the stake in the line in the sand, I've never been there. I don't know. That's only going to kill him. And the good thing is I'm hoping that we, instead of Borked, we have Kavanaugh. I'm looking forward to that.
I really hope so. But I think, again, it really speaks very poorly of the Republican Party that in this climate, given what is not only circling Donald Trump, but so many Republican, elected officials that are actually in office now, or people that have resigned, or, that's just the sentiment that is going around their party is that there is domestic abuse and that there's sexual misconduct. And it goes all the way to the top.
Sure.
And it's at every level.
Yeah, but doesn't that come with, they're the party of hyper-religiosity. They're the party of privilege. I mean, that comes with that territory, doesn't it?
It seems to, yeah. I mean, in terms of what we see borne out in, reality. But people are still voting for that, and it doesn't make good sense. That we see this over and over and over again. And I think women in particular 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump.
Yep.
This is knowing what was in his past in regards to sexual misconduct and him being a sexual predator.
So do you think that, because I said at the beginning, it'll be interesting to see come November if, 70% of the women vote for Democrats, because that's where I think it should be. I know the argument is it should be 100%, but that's never going to happen. But, somewhere in the 65, 70, 75% range, that seems reasonable given what they have already shown themselves to be. Because I got to think most women have had a moment where they've been uncomfortable, where something like this could have happened, or they know somebody that it's happened to and identify with it. And I can't imagine that you want that on the Supreme Court of the United States.
No, you absolutely don't. And just even the discussion around this is very triggering to women everywhere, even if they aren't necessarily politically engaged, but that's swirling around in the news. And then that immediately brings back memories of their own personal experience. And so this presidency, quote unquote, as it goes on, continues to be triggering for millions of women. And I think that, I would really very much like to see those numbers improve. I really would like to see women come over to the side of this is misogyny, this is unacceptable. But if not, I think we continue to have a Stockholm syndrome going on.
Do you find it as ironic as I do that this guy beat the first female candidate for president, and it's all they can do to rub it in their face, in her face and in women's faces?
Yeah, it's disgusting. And I think that women are even more enraged because she had 3 million more votes.
Yeah.
And that was us. That was women. That was us. That was us looking at the glass ceiling being broken and really working and fighting hard for her to win, and seeing her win, but losing on a technicality, which is what so many of us women have gone through in our lives. And so I think that this continued assault on just our personhood and our privacy and the sanctity of our own bodies, because it's not just these, allegations against Kavanaugh. It's the fact that he stands on the edge of potentially rolling back Roe v. Wade and Griswold, as we talked about last week. And these are things that matter to us in our daily lives. And when you couple those two things of getting rid of abortion, getting rid of contraception, and then you also give a free pass to abusers and sexual predators, what kind of world are you trying to set up for women? If you have daughters, is that the type of world that you want your daughters to grow up in?
Well, look, I've been saying for years, I mean, the extreme right wing who seem to be running our government right now, they want, gays back in the closet, blacks back in the field, and women barefoot and pregnant back in the kitchen. This plays right along with what I believe their aims are.
Yeah, I agree. And so, I mean, that's the way I think we have to discuss this, even though I think it comes across as hyperbolic and really radical to say things in this way. But this is the dystopia that we're in. We really are living these times, and we have to really discuss it on its face, because that's what's at stake.
No, look, I had a couple people email me, go, a couple years ago when you were talking about the Republicans wanted, Roe's one thing, but Griswold's the ultimate goal. They thought, we thought we were just crazy, but now we're actually seeing it come to light, and holy crap, you were right. What do we do? And that becomes the question. I mean, out of this, the last line of questioning I've got for you, out of all of this turmoil, is there a way to use this as an opportunity to grow, to heal, to change, to do things so that maybe we don't repeat this history?
Yeah, for sure. I think we have to use this moment to increase our solidarity and our fellowship with one another. And we really do have to look around and say, how can I be an ally to someone? Maybe you're a man, maybe you don't have daughters, or you don't necessarily have a woman in your life. But you can, envision what that would be like if you can try to be mindful and have some empathy, and see how you can join together and be an ally to women. And the same thing goes with people of color, and the same thing goes with people who are immigrants who are trying to get their citizenship. And how can we use this moment where we are under attack on multiple levels? I mean, this is a culture war. So there's LGBTQ issues going on. All of us stand to be more oppressed and more marginalized if their policies come to fruition. So I think we have to look around us and kind of do some golden rule and join hands and fight back, because we all know who is doing it. We all know where the arrows are coming from.
Yeah. No, and this is why I think November 6th is so important. And, I've been saying for a while, the Women's March was great, but I'd like to see an even bigger march the next time as they march to the polls and throw some of these bums out.
Yeah, I agree.
It's time to clean house, I think. And look, I know Orrin Hatch isn't on the ballot, but is it wrong that I'm fixated on that? Either he's just completely tone deaf and not understanding the era we live in, or he's just an old guy who lives in the past.
Well, I think he's very symbolic of the federal government right now, and who we have in office. I mean, it's 80% white male. And when you tack on rich white male even. And I think he is really illustrative of the patriarchy and what we're fighting against. We're fighting against these people who have these old ideas that they're trying to, still use in the modern day, and it's just not compatible and it's unsustainable. And the fact that they're standing in the way of our progress and us having life in a way that is more fitting and more up to date, they're just standing in the way. They're actually trying to push us backwards.
Yeah, that's why we got to run them over. March them right on over. There you go.
Yeah, I agree.
Jane, I appreciate the time. It's always great talking with you. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Have a great week.
You as well, our good friend Propane Jane. Good stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk.
This is why we fight, why we lie awake. This is why we fight.
Finally, radio for the rest of us. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1947. That was the day workers at the International Harvester plant in Louisville, Kentucky had enough. They had just rejected a pay scale lower than that of harvester workers elsewhere. In her recent article for Leo Weekly, historian Tony Gilpin refers to the lower pay as the Southern Differential. Harvester workers walked off the job in a 40-day strike. Black and white Louisville workers were united in a rare form of solidarity. International Harvester had a long labor-hating history. Its forerunner had been the McCormick Reaper Works, the site that sparked the 1886 Haymarket incident in Chicago. Harvester had been able to keep the unions out until the farm equipment workers of the CIO finally organized there in 1941. And the FE followed Harvester as they attempted to escape to the union-free South. The FE successfully organized the new Louisville plant just 2 months before the strike. Workers learned quickly that they were paid much less making the same equipment as their brothers in Chicago, Indianapolis, and elsewhere. Gilpin adds that the FE literature forthrightly stated, quote, once the Negro and white workers were united, the low-wage system of the South would collapse. Workers pressed for their demands and appealed to area farmers for support. They stressed that farmers would not pay less for equipment, simply because local workers were paid less. Black and white workers picketed together, ate together, and planned their strike together at their new union hall. Harvester initially tried to red bait FE leaders. When that failed, the company was forced to grant steep wage increases. Gilpin cites FE News, which reported, quote, 2 smashing victories in hand. One over International Harvester, the other over the Mason-Dixon low wage line. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show. The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
When it's going down, before you come home.
Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So all day, been the Kavanaugh thing. You got to give Trump and the folks credit, though, trying as they may to distract and change the news cycle. Not sure they're going to get off of the Kavanaugh thing that easy. Sure, they released the documents, more tariffs. I still not going away. Sorry. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. I've got Tom Squitieri, Pentagon correspondent, Talk Media News. Tom, thanks for taking time for us.
Happy Monday. You're so right. The White House was flooding the news zone this afternoon with all sorts of stuff that all are newsworthy items, to be sure. But you're right. The Kavanaugh story is the story in D.C. and maybe elsewhere. I heard late today that they're going to have hearing now Monday.
Yep.
For both Kavanaugh and Ford, the woman who's his accuser, and so that's pushed the committee vote away from Thursday. So we'll have a week now. That's 1 week from today. We'll have a week of frenzied speculation back and forth as to who said what, when, and all that. And I'm not trying to minimize either side. I mean, it's just I can see what kind of week this is going to be probably.
No, it's going to be a really interesting week of watching the extremes play out. I just saw a statement, from Orrin Hatch that, just made me go, either you're just completely tone deaf or this is what white privilege, wealthy white privilege really looks like.
Yeah, I think you just raised a very interesting point, and it's one I was thinking about earlier, not in those terms, but the same universe. And here's why. Earlier in the confirmation process, Kavanaugh described where he grew up as sort of like dangerous, gun-ridden, violent, shooting streets. He grew up like in Bethesda, Chevy Chase, Maryland. And people who live there sort of just scoffed at what he said. I mean, there's crime up there, of course, but it's not like this, some violent street in Chicago that's been getting a lot of attention because of shootings. It's basically an affluent, upper-class area that, in the whole scheme of things about safety in the streets, it's a pretty safe area of the country, let alone the D.C. greater area, metropolitan area. So that alone sort of raised amusement about people at the very most. Why is he saying this to dramatize his background? He went to a private, an all-boys school, and this Miss Ford, who's accusing him, went to an all-girls school, I think, Holton Arms. It's either a private school and all-girl, or co-ed or all girls. And, this is a different part. This is a strain of Washington, D.C. That is upper class or privileged. Even though lower income kids get to go to these schools, mostly it's not. It's mostly upper income, connected families to get their kids in these schools.
Yeah, I mean, and then the important part is having the connections to be able to do this. It's one of the arguments that I make with various people who push the idea of the golden ticket vouchers. Oh, you'll be able to send your kids to the very best school because I had a state senator here on the program a while ago when they were pushing them here in PA, and I said, so if I get this golden ticket, I can send my kids to Germantown Academy or Abington Friends in Philadelphia. I can do that. He goes, absolutely. I go, you're going to tell me that this little golden ticket's going to be worth $45,000 a year, which is what it costs to go to kindergarten in these schools? And he said, absolutely. And it's either he didn't know his own piece of legislation or he was just completely full of bull.
Yeah, well, it could be one of the two. But the fact is that's a different world than most people in Washington, D.C. even have, let alone most of the country. And so I saw it today, letters that were being signed in support of Ford from other females who attended that school over the years, okay? And saying, yep, this is the atmosphere of some of these parties we go to. This is sort of the attitude of the boys of that era, ERA, okay, of that time period, and before and after that. In other words, it goes to what you're referring to. It's sort of a privileged idea of how to behave. And I've heard, I've heard on good authority, as we say. I have a daughter now who's in college, and she went to high school in the District of Columbia, a public school. And she went to other school, middle school, they go to private school and this and that. And some of her classmates from elementary school wound up going to private school and high school just because they wanted their kids to have that kind of education. Nothing wrong with that. I hear stories from those parents talking about behavior of some of the students in those schools. My daughter had gone to parties where there are students coming from these schools. She told me how the behavior is so different among boys and girls in those schools than it is with kids in public school, let's say.
Well, wouldn't it be safe to say those, Tom? Wouldn't it be safe to say the kids that go to those schools come from families who very rarely ever tell the kids no, and the kind of privilege that they have? I mean, I look at Trump is just the epitome of in a lifetime of no one ever telling him no, and him, and not ever there being anything that he can't have at a whim's notice. Yeah, I think that that's a pretty good observation. And, you know, speaking of the Trump family, did you hear and see the note that Donald Trump Jr. wrote in mocking the accusation? Yeah, see, there's somebody who I hope his mother dropped him on his head a couple of times. And that would at least give him an excuse for being, well, I mean, that was just amazing. Letter written in crayon and the whole thing. I was just stupefied when I saw that. I just can't believe anybody would be that insensitive. But I think, again, to your point, that, you know, this is the world in which the privileged, this is the world that they live in, that, you know, this is okay to them, that, you know, I wasn't surprised seeing Dumb Jr. do that. I was just going, I'm just shocked someone let him. Well, maybe they didn't know about it, too, because it goes back to what we were kind of saying earlier. The White House has done, you know how I am, I'm pretty objective to these things. I thought they've done a pretty good job of not raising the rhetoric on this accusation. You know, even President Trump, and I'm paraphrasing him, he said, look, you know, I think, you know, Kavanaugh's a great guy and all that. This woman needs to be, you know, have her time to be heard. It might take a little bit longer, but we need to do it. We'll do it right. For him, that's remarkable restraint, okay? And Kellyanne Conway said something similar, that the woman has a right to be heard. Oh, no, so she also went a step further and said that, well, she has to be under oath. That's fine, but still, I mean, that compared to what they were doing before, I mean, I'm just putting it in perspective. They realize, I think they get what a hot potato this is, okay? So in talking about what Don Jr. did, that must have just, you know, blew their corks, because here they are, the point I was trying to make is here they are trying at least to be calm in the face of, you know, that President Trump probably wants to let it rip. So they're holding it together pretty well, and then Donald Trump Jr. writes this silly, horrible thing. Yeah, he must not have got the memo saying we're going to try and do it right this time. Yeah, he probably missed that memo. Because my question, you know, and I've asked this already. You know, the question is, you know, come November, you know, how this plays out, is it possible that you could see the woman vote going 70-75% towards Democrats? Could you see that kind of a massive split, given what we've seen from the grabber by the you-know-what president who's appointed this guy, nominated this guy to be on the court, and all of the scandal and all of the stuff? Is it possible that women could go, well, you know what, the party has left us? I don't think it would be that high of a vote, but I do believe that's one of the reasons why the White House is taking this as gingerly as possible, because they understand the potential for what you say, a large defection of women voters, or solidifying of women voters, behind Democratic candidates. There already are, I believe, a record number of women running for various offices this November already. So that'll, in a sense, drive out some female supporters, you would think. Coupled with this, so close to the election and how those hearings go. And, you know, what we're not talking about, but we'll be realistic, because we don't know what's going to be said on Monday and the reaction to it. However, that will be, you know, then they'll have to vote or not vote. They're either going to vote on him in committee, or he's going to withdraw, or they're going to vote him down. I mean, these are the options. There are not many choices, and that's not going to end. Look, next week is the last week of September, I believe, or close to the end of September. You're going to be in October already, 1 month before the election. The vote has to come before the election, sooner rather than later. If they're not going to want to vote on this a week before the election, you know that. Right. So I just think that, you know, the timing of all of this will have an impact on the election, because it is so close. It's not like this was a year ago, and then you had a year to have other things consume you. You're on a 6-week, if I'm doing my calendar right, 6 to 8 weeks before, 50 days before the election. 50 days before the election. That's pretty, you know, that's less than 2 months. So
that's a pretty fast track. All the primaries are over now. You have two candidates or three, depending on the race. They're all squaring up against each other now and taking sight on each other. So it's going to have an impact in some way. And I think the impact will be to drive women and voters against Trump to the polls. However, I still, I'm in the minority in this. I think this kind of stuff solidifies some of the vote for Trump even more, because people who like him are going to say, well, we're not going to let these guys do this to us. So there's going to be some hardening of Trump supporters as well. I believe you're correct, however, that the larger shift or the larger impact will be for those who vote against Republicans.
Yeah, I got to tell you, though, I think the white male vote is already solidified. A good portion of the white male vote is already solidified. So you're not changing anything there. For me, it's looking at the women's votes. Which way do they swing? Do you see this move? Because if I were running a campaign, Orrin Hatch would be my guy. I would be looking at him because he was asked the question, if it turns out that the allegations were true, what do you say? And he replied with, well, if they were true, I think it would be hard for senators not to consider who he is today. And I'm going, wait a second. That is the epitome of wealthy white privilege, and I would be running on that.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's not running for re-election, of course.
No, of course not. But I mean, he just, when I was playing football, the coaches would always put up something the other coach or another team said about us to get you all fired up. That's one of those moments there.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, we have to accept the fact that this city is full of hypocrisy now.
Sure.
Looking back at someone else's record all the way back is okay if you don't like that person or you oppose that person. But if you support that person, looking all the way back and then saying, well, they're a different person now, that's okay.
Yeah. Does it make it right?
No. Does it make it right to be hypocritical? No. I mean, this is way off target. But I remember when I was a reporter in Bosnia and covering the conflict there, and the Bosnian Serbs were always getting written up about the atrocities they were allegedly committing. And I remember in a village one time, and some of these Serb paramilitaries were talking to us reporters, and they said, how come you guys always write about us? The Croats and the Muslims do the same thing. And I said, oh, yeah, but that doesn't, just because someone else is doing it doesn't make it right to do.
Right.
You're still doing it. It's like three guys going to rob a grocery store, and they're running out the door, and then one of them trips and gets caught. The other two, get away, and the guy gets caught. Says, wait a minute, those two guys robbed as well. Yeah, but you got caught.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Let's move on. Let's move from this. Fortunately, the storm wasn't as bad as I think was predicted. Still horrible. I think the last report I saw, 20 people dead. How do you think this is going to play out over the next several days as now the hard work of cleaning up comes up?
Yeah, let me tell you the good news about this is the Pentagon has been briefing us like round the clock many times. They were on this. They were pretty well organized to do what they could to help with high water vehicles. They had two ships following the storm in, the Kearstuds and I think the Arlington, with amphibious units that go behind the storm. In other words, once Florence hit the ground and coast and moved in, they followed it in that way. So they were trying to attack with help from all ways possible. And they had generators and all sorts of good stuff. So they really were prepared to help. I think the states were also prepared. Obviously it's a big difference between Puerto Rico and the mainland because you could send trucks from Pennsylvania and Ohio and other places to go help restore power where you can't just drive them into an island. This is not justifying the White House's action on Puerto Rico, but it is a reality that you can drive from Indiana or Wyoming if you had to help out.
And they were both Trump states, so I think that helps.
Yeah, that helps also. But you're right, the storm petered out a little bit with the wind, which was very, very helpful. So you have a lot of water damage. Now, I think, weather is an always interesting factor in elections. If the perception is the government let us down, I'm speaking if I'm from North or South Carolina, so they didn't clear the streets, how that had an impact on the race. That happens a lot, weather issues. I don't think so. I think that this one may have a small impact if it goes bad. It doesn't look like it's going that bad. You can hear reports of people in Wilmington, North Carolina, they're cut off because of flooding and there's no electricity, so ATMs aren't working and charge cards aren't. There's all these kind of real problems that the the government can help to a certain extent. They set up food banks for people to have cars to get to them. At some point, you can't blame the government because of the destruction.
Sure.
So I think that this week is okay. I think if it lingers, this goes back to the clock that we were talking about on the last issue. You're only 6 weeks away from the election, so if things move forward in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I think the impact will be minimal. If it lingers for 6 weeks, close to the election, I think that it could have an impact on some races. But there's not that many congressional seats in those two states that are being contested. In other words, that aren't favoring one candidate, an incumbent already.
Right.
So how much of an impact it would have on the overall numbers, it's hard to see at this point. Nevertheless, Rick, this is crazy years of politics these last couple of years, and so everything that you can kind of look at as predictors aren't necessarily stable predictors.
No, it's remarkable how things have shifted over the years.
Yeah.
And finally, James Mattis evidently is going to Macedonia. Why is he going there?
He's actually back. He's back today. He went on Sunday. Talk about a brutal trip. He flew over Sunday. He's back on Monday today. Macedonia is trying to get into NATO, and they're going to be invited once they work out this name thing with Greece, which is a whole separate little story. But the Russians are trying to interfere in the vote in Macedonia to vote for the name change, just like the Russians tried to have a coup in Montenegro last year when Montenegro was going to vote about joining NATO. Russia doesn't like any more members of NATO. They see the Balkans as their backyard. Mattis is amazingly well respected around the world in these countries. Went over there to show support and to talk tough about the Russians, which helps a lot. He's back today. Tomorrow's Tuesday. He's in town tomorrow, and I think he's leaving again on another trip on Wednesday. He's traveling a lot. The stories are now increasing about how Trump doesn't like him anymore, and that he'll try to get rid of him after the election. That remains to be seen. But until that happens, Mattis is doing what he does pretty well, which is going and reassuring allies as well as opponents about the sincerity of U.S. efforts to work together,
or at least our militaries.
The military to military, yeah, which is important. He likes to point out that even the Chinese and the United States militaries, if they can have a dialogue, that could offset a little bit the political and economic tensions between the two countries.
Sure.
There's a what they call a deconfliction line in Syria, where the Russians and the Americans speak to each other, the military folks, so they know whose planes are in the air at what time, so that it helps to avoid accidental conflicts or dogfights. And it's worked so far there. So, there is a value to military discussions, and that's his thing, and he does it pretty well. But he's going to be traveling, I think, almost every week in October. And so, in other words, between now and the election, he's going to be out of the country for the most part.
Yeah, talking is extremely important. Even during the height of the Cold War, we had the bat phone. You were still talking, and when that breaks down, that's when you really start to worry.
Yeah,
exactly. You're spot on, Tom. I appreciate the thoughts, the time. Good stuff.
All right, I'll talk to you later, Rick. Have a good one.
Thanks so much, Tom Squitieri, Pentagon correspondent there with Talk Media News. Good guy. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day that leading Southern textile employers met together in Greenville, North Carolina. They met to plan a coordinated response to the national textile strike. The Great Depression had ravaged the textile industry. Workers were subject to the, quote, stretch out. Fewer workers were expected to work at a faster pace to produce the same amount of products. Work in textile mills was already grueling. The stretch out made conditions even more unbearable. Fed up, 20,000 Southern workers walked off the job in July. From there, the numbers grew. On Labor Day, 65,000 workers in North Carolina joined the strike. Strikers confronted scabs and moved to close down mills not participating in the strike. They also disrupted railroad traffic. In response, the National Guard was called out against the strikers. Violence erupted between the strikers and armed police and strikebreakers throughout the South and New England. The Southern owners decided it was time to marshal their own response to the strike. According to historian Jeremy Brecker, an army of 10,000 National Guardsmen was mobilized in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi, supplemented by 15,000 armed deputies. But despite this show of force, the strike grew. More than 400,000 textile workers had walked off the job. In response, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration declared that the working conditions and wages in the industry should be studied. Although there were no guarantees for improvement, union leaders called off the strike. Much to the anger of many rank-and-file union members, one of the largest worker actions in U.S. history and one of the most important uprising of Southern labor was ended.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. The U.S. accused Russia of systematically violating sanctions on North Korea on Monday, telling fellow members of the UN Security Council such actions reduce the likelihood of pressuring Kim Jong-un to surrender his nuclear weapons. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley.
Every time the Security Council overlooks sanctions violation, every time we allow the Russians to bury evidence of violations, we remove incentives of Pyongyang to end its nuclear program.
Haley cited several instances of Russia's alleged sanctions violation, including ship-to-ship oil and coal transfers off the North Korean coast, which she said have allowed the Kim regime to far surpass its yearly allowable oil imports.
We think they've obtained 4 times the annual quota in the first 8 months of this year.
So why would Russia, which has voted 11 times to impose sanctions on North Korea, violate those very sanctions? Haley said the answer is money, or economic development, given that Russia's Far East has, as she put it, few economic opportunities. Increased trade with North Korea looms as a tempting possibility. Russia wants new markets for its Siberian coal, Haley said, and envisions a railway to take its exports through North Korea and toward major ports in South Korea where it could find international buyers. Haley seemed to acknowledge the long-term merits of such a plan, but said Russia needs to wait to realize its vision.
It isn't time yet to relieve the pressure on North Korea, no matter how lucrative it is for Russia. As we have all agreed to, that time comes with denuclearization, not before.
For his part, Russia's ambassador to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, condemned the Trump administration's maximum pressure strategy against North Korea, saying, quote, "Sanctions cannot replace diplomacy." Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith. Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
So the latest number, the official number now says 31 people have died as a result of the hurricane tropical storm Florence. That's up from the 20 that I had thought earlier. Horrible. And again, the response is going to be, we'll see what comes out of this response and what Trump has done. And what's been interesting the last couple of days, and I'm not quite sure why this is happening, I've been getting a flood of really bizarre, crazy right-wing kind of email, kind of attacking, almost some of them almost proud of attacking workers. The one guy was, it'll be good when the unions are all gone and we can get cheap labor. And you go, who exactly are you hoping gets screwed in this? Because, even this guy, claims to be a business person. At some point, it's going to affect him as well. When people have no disposable income or no ability to buy things, he's going to be harmed just as much eventually. But, again, it's short-term, tip-of-the-nose kind of thinking. And, also, a bunch of, and I guess it's because we've had Chris Troop on a couple of times here recently talking about just how bizarre the Christian right, the extreme Christian right has become. And I've been getting a lot of those emails as well. One today, though, just grabbed me and stuck out as, I don't know. I don't know how one person can have so many conflicting kind of thoughts. Obviously hyper religious, obviously the evangelical kind that want to go out and proselytize and beat you over the head with the book. And I hope I'm wrong. But from the email, that I got from this person, who claimed that I don't believe, and I don't believe people should be in your face about religion at all. But this person writes, I don't listen much in the way of left-wing talk, but I did hear you say that Christians should not get in your face about religion. And I agree with that. Your religion is your thing. I think George Carlin put it best. Religion is like a lift in your shoes. If you need it to help you get through the day, if you need it to feel better, if you need it to, to have somewhere to work towards, good on you. Just don't make me wear your shoes. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But this person goes on and says, I've never had a Christian get in my face. Well, I guess it depends on what the world in which you live. I have had a bunch of people over the years attempt to convert, convince, harass, however you want to frame that. But this person says, I find it odd that more Christians do not tell the gospel. And I think there are enough people on the street corners already screaming at us with the book in their hand. Just kind of my thought. Because they know, she says, this person, we know that eternity is forever. Yes, eternity, kind of. That's the meaning of it. So we should be telling the gospel. And look, if someone's receptive to it and you want to have that conversation and they want to engage in it with you, good on you. Go do that. But the idea of, standing on a street corner, the idea of knocking on my door unwanted, that kind of stuff, keep it to yourself. Because it's always been my view, the person who tells me how wonderful they are and how, shares their religiosity quite easily are the very people that you really don't want around, because they're generally the ones who are robbing you blind. And I look at those people on TV who, I believe are all charlatans. But hey, maybe somewhere on the road they were, we're just preaching the word. But it usually comes back to saying, hey, send us a lot of money because we need a bigger house. Then this is where it gets weird. This person writes, I hear people on the left saying they can't figure out why Christians are for Trump. We are worried about the country. The country is going down once it becomes socialistic. Okay. Once the Democrats get back in the country, it will never be the same. Did you know the Democrats were the party of slavery? They sure put on an act of liking slavery. And when they saw the benefit, they do a voting issue, blah, blah, blah. This person says, I don't like Trump's personality, but he does care about the country. And I go, okay, well, if he did care about the country, you got to worry about the debt. You got to worry about being a Christian, the moral fabric of a guy who's, advocating for grabbing, by the you-know-what, and, nominating a guy to the Supreme Court who has some of these troubling allegations going on. You got to wonder about that. You got to wonder about a bunch of the messaging that comes out. But, none of that stuff matters until you start looking at policy. And this is my problem with Trump. My Trump is a lot of policy things that are going to harm workers, going to harm consumers, going to harm women, going to harm minorities, all of this stuff. Again, you can have your revisionist history. At the time, Democrats were in favor of, of slavery back, 200 years, 150 years ago. It's not the same Democratic Party, just like it's not the same Republican Party. And this is where this kind of static thinking, we're the party of Lincoln. No, you're not. You're not. You're not even close. You're the party right now of white supremacists. You're the party right now of an oligarch. You're the party of right now of anything but democracy. You're the party of an authoritarian leader with a bunch of lackeys who follow them without question. That's a problem. And your anti-socialistic policies, which, okay, you can be that, but they finish it. This person finishes up with Obamacare. We absolutely have no insurance anymore. I don't know what that means. We have no insurance anymore. He spoiled our insurance is what this person writes. We are on Medicare, and the whole thing went down after Obama came in. Do I need to go into the socialistic Medicare argument? Do I need to go in that it was Democrats who fought for Medicare? Do I need to say any of those things? Or do we know that? Or do we think this person doesn't? Because I know we like to pick and choose our little bits of history. And yes, I know where the Democratic Party came from. And I know when the conversion happened to where they started caring about minority rights and they were no longer the party of slavery. Just right around the same time, the Republicans came from the party of abolishing slavery to the party of, well, we want slaves again. Only this time, we don't want to actually own them. We just want to lease them. Because what we learned is when we owned them, we had to take care of them. This way, if we just use them and lease them, they have to take care of themselves and let them starve when we don't need them anymore. Because, hey, we can pay them cheaper wages. And this is my problem with where we are today as a society. There's so much mixed ideology. There's so much, well, I know this tidbit and this tidbit and this tidbit, and I'm going to somehow weave this together into a belief. And you hear this a lot from the Christian crowd. I believe. Well, I don't believe anything until you show me in fact. You know, I can believe that there are Martians. I would like to see the facts that there are. I can believe that Donald Trump is a good, God-fearing Christian who loves women and all of that. But what I've seen is, well, everything but that. Snatching children from their parents' arms, locking them in cages in 55-degree temperature so that they stay awake. The kind of breaking up of families, the kind of just obscene behavior. And yet that gets a pass in the Christian world because you know why? He's going to appoint a justice that's going to overturn Roe versus Wade because that's the blinders. And look, I've never been pro-abortion. I've always been pro-safety. I as Bill Clinton said, I want it to be safe, legal, and rare. I want to push education. But again, the people on the other side, the Christian side, the evangelical side, always saying, no, abstinence only, because we want to keep our kids stupid. So that when they do have sex and they do eat from the forbidden tree, that they get the full punishment. And this is why the evangelicals lose me a lot. It's that punishment, that constant fire and brimstone, except if it's someone like Kavanaugh who gets a pass on, well, you know, they were just young, or she should have known better. Shouldn't have been there. I'm really struggling with, because I don't want to be mean to folks like this. I don't want to attack them. Because I think that, and I truly believe this, I try never to attack someone's patriotism or their love of this country. I believe that everyone loves their country. I believe that everyone wants the best. And at the end, we want the same things. I just find it very interesting that there are those who are scattered in their understanding of how we got where we are, how things happened, and, well, where we want to go. But when someone on Medicare tells me that we can't have socialized medicine, we can't have single-payer health care, it just kind of makes me go, what the F are you talking about? The guy in Lebanon back in 2010, get your government hands off my Medicare. The height of ignorance. At the end of the day, I fear that some of us only care when it affects us directly. So this person must think that something happened with their Medicare that I'm sure happened back during the Bush years, and they just finally figured it out. But they can blame the black guy in the White House because it fits the frame. It's that Democrat. It's that minority. He's giving things away. This is what scares me about this country, this tip of the nose thinking. And I hope, and look, I want to engage folks like this because I think that there's hope. In fact, this week, last week we had on the former Trump train guy, Weissman, who was, saying, look, I was fully on the Trump train. And then I started actually looking for facts and my mind completely changed. At some point, we've got to figure that out again. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, email me. I want to hear the crazy. Bring the crazy. Thanks for being here. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com.